Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. We're kind of getting to the end of school, so hopefully the reviews will come quicker. I have two books that I finished, but I haven't reviewed, that I'll hopefully get them, one this week, one next week. And then I just have to, finish some books before I can get the reviews out to you. Today, I'm going to be reviewing The Golden Compass, and I'll review its sequel, The Subtle Knife, hopefully next weekend. But to start, for my non-spoiler section of The Golden Compass, I really enjoyed this book. I had heard that it was a book that could be that can be read by children and that can be enjoyed by people of younger ages, but it's still really good even when you're older, and that completely checks out for me. I really like this book. I love the main characters. I love I think all books that try to look at things not just through the eyes of a child, but are able to accomplish that realistically. I think it can be difficult to accurately look through the world through a child's eyes, but when it's done well, I think it works really well, and that happens here in The Golden Compass. All the main characters are amazing. I love Lyra. I love York. I love I love the gypsies. I love the people at Jordan College. Everyone we meet. The heroes are super likable. The villains are super hateable, and like it's a simplistic story. But I think in that simplicity, it's able to accomplish so many different things in the simplicity of the novel. In addition to that, for being a fantasy novel, it's kind of weird because it's a fantasy novel, but it's set in a world like our world, with it, similar with similar locations and places, yet different histories and how everything plays out, which took some getting used to. I wasn't necessarily a huge fan of it in the beginning, but by the end, I didn't really mind it as much, especially since we ended up like in Russia, which I'm not super familiar with the history, with like the intricate details of the history of Russia, so that didn't really hamper my enjoyment as much as it kind of did in the beginning when we were in Europe. But like I said, with the characters, I love the gypsies. I love their support of Lyra and that the quest that they go on. And I love meeting York and the Ballooner and just the witches and just everyone we meet along the way and how they help Lyra out on her journey was just really awesome. Just like all these small characters that just contributed a lot to the story as a whole. The looming threat, the villains of the story are, like I said, extremely hateable, and it was amazing. Like they're villains that I like it because sometimes when you have more complex villains when you're in a series, in other series, it's nice to have a little bit more simplistic with villains that still have complexities in why they do the things, but there's less of a question of whether or not they're evil, which is something I really do like here in The Golden Compass. The fantastical elements are pretty interesting. There's not a ton there when it comes to the fantastical elements. I think I finished The Subtle Knife, and that kind of, for me, that ramps up in the second book. In the first book, it's just enough touch of fantasy that it gives that interesting fantasy flavor without kind of overwhelming the book. One thing I was surprised, though, because I had heard that this book can be easily enjoyed by people who are younger. I was surprised about how dark it got. There were some parts of this that I genuinely felt kind of like, oh wow, you're supposed to read this to children. Especially when we were in the facility and seeing what was happening there. I genuinely felt uncomfortable. I genuinely felt kind of like almost like horror, and like reading this to children, I think, would be an interesting experience when you get to that section. But I think that darker tone really contributes to the novel because for most of it, it has the action bits and kind of stakes, but it's still kind of a more lighthearted novel. That section changes the book for me. In terms of from something that is pretty lighthearted to something that has a serious dark edge, and that was really cool to see. I wasn't expecting that, and it definitely, that segment and how Lyra deals with it and how everything that happens there was definitely a highlight to the book. In addition, for this one, the simplicity, I think I keep going back to, is really the sell here, because a lot of the characters' motivations are easy to understand. There aren't some complex or convoluted motivations in why people are doing things. I'll get to this in my review of the second book, but I think that was the biggest part I disliked of the second book was, the complexity of the complexity and just kind of like contrivances. Maybe that's probably that's the right word, but that kind of take place in order to get people to do what they do. And so that, like I said, I keep coming back. This is a simple book, and I think that it accomplishes what it's trying to do very effectively. It's able to use darker elements to effectively convey its themes and raise stakes. It's not my favorite book. It does run into those problems that you get with more simplistic characters. It runs into the problem you get with child characters where they can be kind of annoying or unlikable at times. But overall, it's a really good book that I would absolutely recommend, despite, some shortcomings. It's a good book, not a great book, just from some minor things here and there. But overall, really enjoyed the book. I'll come back in a second for my spoiler-filled thoughts. So to start with my spoiler-filled thoughts, I'll talk about some of my favorite elements of the book. Three areas in particular were really great for me. It was the beginning at Jordan College, the part at the facility, and then finally where they're dealing with the bears in Salverbard. I think that's pronounced Salverbard. I don't know. It's like Russian or something. But those are the three areas that really stand out to me. The Jordan College bits are they're a lot of fun. They're really fun sections, and it effectively establishes Lyra's character, effectively establishes who she is, what her personality is. I think it sets up the daemons and everything involving that really well, and it provides a really interesting, like, almost whimsical, fantastical start, even with, it feels very, kids fairy tale-esque. Yes, you have the poison plot, and, like, there are some, darker elements here and there, but overall, it still has that kind of more whimsical and more, fun and fancy, fantasy vibe. The facility part, I love it because of the darkness. It provides a level of, like, darkness that I was not expecting from this book, and every part of this book is highlighted, and the villains especially are highlighted because of that segment of the book. And that kind of just bleeds right into Salverbard. I think that Lyra, her discussions with the king, or with the false king on Salverbard, really elevate, it shows her cunning as a character, and I love that part of the book. And then the fight was really well done, and just kind of the slow realization and final desperate attempt at the end of that book was just exciting. Seeing Lyra figure it out, and just all the character reactions there were really great, except for the end with Miss Cloister, whatever his name, Miss Cloister, and Lord Astrid weren't my favorite, but overall, those three sections really stood out. The first for providing that fantastical background and that whimsy to start off the book. The second part is just to add that darkness, and then finally Salverbard to just up the stakes and leave for a really awesome climax to the book. The weakness for me, of course, there was just the middle. It kind of felt a little slow and meandering. There were great elements, meeting the witches and seeing how they functioned, some fun interactions with the gypsies, but it felt a little slow. I'm glad it was pretty quick. It didn't really add as much to the story as I would have liked from that segment. But it's an important part. You have to show that part, so I don't mind it too much. When it comes to the Athometer, or however it's pronounced, I really like that as a plot device. It gives Lyra a power over others, and I think for, like, someone who's a small girl who probably comes up to here, it gives her some power. It gives her influence that she might not have otherwise had, and it allows her cunning and her wit to kind of shine through, and that's the best parts of her character. And just the way that she's the only one to access it is just a really cool plot device that I think really how it drives this story is awesome. The foreshadowing was great. A lot of Jordan College sets up this foreshadowing that pays off beautifully. At the end of this book, her betrayal, her accidental betrayal, just all of that set up in the beginning of the book led to really satisfying payoffs later on in the book. When it comes to our heroes, it was just Lyra was really great, and our cast of characters, the gypsies, the bears, all of them, the aeronautical balloonists from Texas, the witches, just because Lyra is such a fun character to get to spend time with, because she's such a fun character to spend time with, her interactions with these different groups are just so much fun to listen to, because she's able to just interact with everyone and just be this really just connecting force that makes any scene with her, no matter who she's with, enjoyable. On the flip side, the villains are amazing. They're like the perverted sense of, using religion for their own ends, and all of that, manipulating faith and manipulating governments for power. It's a really they're really interesting villains, because you can see why they're doing things, which makes them more dynamic, but they are just kind of plain evil, which makes it for a very it's enjoyable to see them get their comeuppance. It's enjoyable to see the facility get destroyed because of how evil they are, while adding that extra depth of why they're doing what they're doing. I have thoughts on like how the religion and how that's portrayed in The Subtle Knife. But for this book, I think it's a really interesting perspective on how religion can be manipulated and how it can be taken too far, and how people who don't care about it can use it for their own ends. It offers a pretty scathing and decent critique of especially the Catholic Church, especially some of the heights of its power, that I found really compelling, and an interesting perspective through those segments of the book, which I really thought was well done. But yeah, overall, great book. It's a really good book. I would highly recommend it, especially it's a short read. It's like 350 pages. Like that's the size of like a Discworld book. So I really would recommend this. And then, like I said, when it comes to my channel, hopefully a Subtle Knife review coming out next weekend. But I'm off to spring break vacation, and so I'll see you then.